Okay, so we are going to draft the basic shirt collar. If you're using the 5th edition of the book, this should be on page 181. And I'm going to follow the steps. We need to start by measuring the neckline for both the front and back bodice. I do not have my back bodice without the shoulder dart, so I'm actually going to measure from my paper patterns because I did have those filed away in the envelope. And I do have the one with where we transferred the shoulder dart to the neckline. So this is the one that you should be measuring from because the neckline measurement here is different than the basic bodice with the shoulder dart. Okay. So we're going to measure going from center front. So this is my bodice front. And if I'm measuring from center front to where the shoulder meets the neckline, or actually I'm going to measure from shoulder to neckline. I'm measuring my curve and I'm going to pivot on my curved line. And my suggestion would be to measure this twice. And I'm at exactly 4.5. I'm going to write that measurement here for my neckline. Then I'm going to measure back neckline. Making sure I start at the center back. And I'm going to pivot wherever the measuring tape starts to move away from the curve. So here I am at 4 and like a 16. I'm going to do 4 1/8 here for my back neckline. Okay, so the book asks you to write these measurements down. So I'm going to just write them at the bottom of my draft paper. So front neckline is 4.5 inches. Back neckline is 4 1/8. So next step, so we're at figure 1, and you can take your clear ruler or your L square, and we're going to draw, so this pattern will actually be on the fold, so we're only drafting half of it, and make sure that you're putting your center line down and then you're drafting to the right, exactly as it's shown in the book. Okay, so it's showing you the figure and which way to work out from your guideline. So I want to just remind you to make sure that your paper is facing you in the direction that we read. Okay, letters and numbers, so not upside down or sideways. And I'm going to put my guideline. I like using the crosses or the 1 as a guideline for making a straight line. And I'm just going to put a guideline in the middle. This may actually be enough paper for me to draft both collars. So I think my paper here is about, let's see, 19 inches wide, and I think 14 inches, about 14 inches high. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to square a line from the center of the paper. You can do this using your clear ruler or using your L square. I'm working with limited table space here, but if I were to use my L square, I'm just going to line this up here. And I'm going to draw actually on the inside of my ruler. And it's telling me square a line in the center of the paper, mark and label the following locations. So A to B is going to be 3 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and square this line out first. And you can just choose a point to square out. I'm going to go just to the end of my paper. So A to B, B is in this right angled corner here. A to B is 3 inches, so I'm going to measure up 3 inches from B. Put a tick mark here, and this is A. Okay. B to C is my total neck measurement, so I need to add my 4.5 from my front and my 4 1/8 from the back. So that will be 4 5/8. So my total is 4 5/8. So I'm going to measure from B and mark C. So I'm going to put my 4 5/8 here. And I'm sorry, 8 5/8. Wow. 8 5/8. Here. Put a tick mark here, and this is C. B to D is my center back to shoulder. So my back measurement was 4 1/8. This is actually your center back here. So my B to D would be, so B is my center back, and I'm measuring to where that shoulder point would be because this is essentially upside down that we're drafting it. So back to shoulder, that would be my 4 1/8. So I'm going to put my tick mark here, and this is D, and this will end up being a shoulder notch. So I'm going to just label it here. And this is my center back here, and C is my center front, just so I'll know my orientation here. Okay, so I'm going to square a line up from C. So whenever it says square line, that means we're doing a right angle. So I'm going to line up my L square here. And I'm going to square a line up from C. Mark E a 1/2 inch from C. So I'm going to come up from C, 1/2 inch, and mark E. Here's a tick line here. I'm marking E a 1/2 inch up from C. Draw a curved line from E blending with D. So I'm actually going to use the hip curve here. Remember that the flattest part of the curve needs to be facing your straight line. So I'm going to slide this along line BC until I hit E. And I'm going to draw from E blending with D. So once I hit line D, I'm going to stop. All right. So now I'm going to square a line from A passing 1 inch or more from guideline C. So I am going to line this up with A. And I'm not going to measure 1 inch or more right now. I'm just going to square a line out, making sure I go past C. and I'm going to label this F. So this will determine the pretty much the point on your collar. So it says 1 inch or more. So let's determine that inch right now. I'm going to put a tick mark here. That is F. And I'm going to connect that with point E. Okay. So drawing a line from E to F, we just did. We're going to draw a grain line, and that needs to be parallel to our center back. So I'm going to go ahead and label our center back here, which is line AB again, and we're going to come in 1 inch from the grain line, making sure we use our clear ruler so that's parallel. And here's our straight grain line. Now for a collar, this can be cut on any grain for a collar. So I'm also going to have you put straight grain and a cross grain. So that will run 90 degrees into your perpendicular to your straight grain line. And we will also put a bias grain line on. So, and I think that's something that we have not yet done. So what you're going to do for this bias grain line is I'm going to have you line this up perpendicular just like this. So where these two lines intersect, you're going to line up the inside of the ruler. I'm going to put a little tick mark on the inside of the ruler and also on the outermost point of the ruler, and that's our 45-degree angle, which is our bias grain line. So I have all 3 grain lines in case I have an interesting print that I want to cut on the bias or stripes or something like that. So I have all 3 grain lines here. Okay, so when we're cutting, this would actually be on the fold, so we do need a fold bracket here. So I'm going to have you go in before we trace this off on another piece of paper at 1/2 inch and draw your fold bracket. Please make sure you're using a ruler. Make sure it's perpendicular to that center back, and you're going to draw arrows pointing toward the center back because that's the edge that would be placed on the fold. Okay, so this is fold. And for your collar, we would actually cut 2, but since this is our upper collar, which I'm going to go ahead and label it, we would cut 1. And we're going to do an under collar, which is the same shape, but we just trim a little bit off. In apparel 1, we did an under stitching because we didn't want the under collar to roll out in case it was in a different print or cut out of felt or something and didn't match the shirt. So we actually trim a little bit off just to make sure it stays in place. So what we're going to do next is go ahead and trace this off onto another paper, which I'll do in the next video.